Welcome to the Sales Queen podcast, where we teach women how to turn their skills into sales and monetize their message so they can finally sell with the clarity, confidence, and certainty that they've always wanted to. No longer does the game of sales need to be an old boys club. It's time for you to sell like a queen. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the Sales Queen podcast. I am here with one of my favorite copywriters in the world, Seth Czerepak. He has personally helped me to write some of my best messaging for both of my companies, and I'm so excited to have him here on the show today. So Seth, thank you so much for being here.
It's very good to be here, Megan.
Awesome. Well, I love to start off the show for all of the people that are on as guests with just kind of telling your origin story, but you also have, I would say, a better origin story than most people. So side note, if you want to know the whole thing, because it would take us 5 hours to tell the whole thing, go to Seth's website where you guys can get some amazing copywriting materials and also literally hear the entire thing. But Seth, maybe in regards to copywriting in general and kind of how you got to what you do today and how you grew your gift, whatever parts of your story you want to share, let's kind of start there, and I'm all ears.
Well, my inspiration for understanding human behavior didn't come out of like this really earth-shattering divine moment. It actually was when I attempted suicide when I was 17, and I took my dad's gun and tried to shoot myself with it, and had been drinking at the time, and so I realized, like, as soon as I heard the click and realized he had taken the bullets out of it, I thought two things went through my head. Number one, either A, you need to try this again, you need to get it right next time. And I was in really bad shape. I mean, we're talking 30 years ago. Or I want to understand why I did what I did. Because it's like I was okay the week before. You know, I had a lot of friends and I was playing music back then. I really loved playing music. I still love playing music. And so I was pretty happy, thought I was for the most part. But then, here out of the blue, I just decided to do something that was really dumb. And so that's really where I started thinking really heavily about why people do what they do. And to make a really long story short, there was a chain of events that followed that a couple years later where this guy actually tried to recruit me into an MLM company. And through the conversation, I ended up telling him no. But he gave me this book by this man named Les Brown. Les Brown's a motivational speaker. The book is called Live Your Dreams. And there was a line in there that really just reached out and grabbed me by the throat. And it said, in life, it's not what you do that matters, but it's who you become. And there was just this feeling that came over me, like warm honey being poured over me, because it was such a comfort for me to realize that no matter what I did in my life, no matter how many times I failed, how many things I got wrong, the most important thing that you can develop is your character. That's the one thing nobody can ever take away from you. You can lose your house, you can lose your car, you can even lose your memory, but who you are is the one thing that you can never lose. And so I made a commitment at that time in my life that I was going to develop myself as a person, and I was going to develop to a very high degree the skill of understanding why people did what they did. And that's what my whole life has been about since then. And when I first actually started to discover copywriting, because I thought writing was always a good way to kind of explore the contents of your own mind, to understand and to refine your thoughts. But and I also thought, reading other people's writings was a good way to understand them. But I didn't know what the hell copywriting was. I was just a music teacher trying to work my way through college. This was about 7 years after the incident I just talked about. I was 24 years old. And I was struggling to bring people into my music studio because I was a guitar and piano teacher, and I was trying to put myself through college. And I remembered that about a year before that, I had found this ad in this magazine for a $99 product called Perfect Pitch. It was a musical product. It was terrible. I ended up buying it, paid $99 for it, which was a lot of money back then.
Yeah.
But I kept thinking, like, I could have bought ramen noodles or whatever the hell college kids, buy normally. But I kept thinking there was something in that ad that made me want to buy it. And I just thought that was just the most amazing thing. And I thought, what, I bet I can take the stuff in that ad. I had no idea what copywriting was, but I loved writing. I bet I could take the stuff in that ad and kind of retool it and repurpose it and create ads to bring people into my music studio. And so that's what I did. I started experimenting with it. I put it on business cards, on flyers, and newspaper ads, and people started coming in. And I thought it was the coolest thing because I could send these little messages out there, like these little magical elves, that even when I wasn't working or out there looking for people or actively trying to find clients, it would bring people into me. And so I filled up my music studio by doing that. I put myself through college. I still had no idea what copywriting was. Then I got a sales job after I got out of college when I was doing telephone sales. And this is really where I started to discover that I had a knack for sales. I had been raised to believe that like selling was evil and you didn't take money from people and you didn't ask people for money and that rich people were evil and that entrepreneurs had all ripped people off to get where they were. And so when I got that sales job, I was going through the script and reading it over the phone, and I thought I could do something better than this. So I rewrote the whole script, and I started selling
Come
more than anybody in the
on.
room, right?
Let's go.
And so anyway, I still remember my boss calling me into the office and saying, "I want to talk to you about the script." And I thought, oh, I'm surely going to get fired here. But he ended up taking the components from that, retooling the script for the entire call center, and everybody's sales started going up just because of the script being rewritten. And so I from there built a couple call centers. I worked for a motivational seminar company called Get Motivated Seminars, which is owned by Peter Lowe here in Tampa. I ended up becoming a business coach for them. That's where I got my first 10,000 hours in business coaching. And I was teaching people how to create marketing materials, sales materials. I was creating our sales scripts and materials. I broke all the company records there my first month, created all the sales script for the sales team, the appointment setting team, the retention team. Still had no idea what copywriting was, but I just knew that I had the power to write things that could sell stuff when I wasn't there. And so, long story short, when I was about, I think it was 2008, I finally read this book called The Well-Fed Writer by I can't even remember the guy's name now. It was Pete or something. And he talked about becoming this thing called a copywriter that people would pay you to do. So I left my
Yeah.
$100,000 job in the corporate world, became a copywriter, did that for 13 years. And until finally I came to work for Rudy Moore about a year ago. So that's my entire
Wow.
history as a copywriter.
That was summed up very, very well. And for anybody listening, can you tell that he's a copywriter by the way that he speaks? That was one of the, that's what I'm like
I don't know
laughing
how
at
that
because
happened. I was the
I don't
most
know how that
awkward.
happened. Yeah.
I was the most awkward kid. You know, I had like the worst social skills. I had a head the size of ET, and I had to do a lot of shoulder presses kind of to balance stuff out. So I don't know how I became a persuasive and good communicator, except for just from studying how ideas get into people's minds and how words influence people.
Yeah.
So if I can do this,
Yeah, but you know
anybody
what?
can
There's
do it.
there's something to that, Seth, because I think a lot of people count themselves out, and I think also what I'm hoping for in terms of this podcast as well is that people can be encouraged that maybe they don't feel called to be the CEO or the entrepreneur. And again, being a copywriter is a whole business. People pay a crap ton of money for this. But I think a lot of times people think that you have to be the marketer and that only being the salesperson or the marketer is what constitutes as a CEO. But
Right.
people hire people just for copywriting, and it's this whole world that people notice because it's what is ultimately selling them in terms of their marketing message, but people don't even know what this is, and it literally is like the highest paid skill in the world, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's the most important business skill. I mean, that may sound narcissistic of me, but there's a reason I'm doing this. I think of copywriting as telepathic selling. You know, it's the only way that you can actually you can reproduce the contents of your own mind, your own selling skills, and put it out there where it'll bring you clients and bring you traffic even while you're sleeping. On the other side of the
Mm-hmm.
world, it's like transmitting a message through time and space through an ad or an email or a direct mail or whatever it is. And if you can get people to do that, you've just multiplied and cloned yourself, which is every entrepreneur's dream, in my opinion.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, what would you say are some of the core tenets if somebody is either new in their entrepreneurial journey or maybe they're really good at sales or really good at operations, but they know that they're lacking in terms of their marketing message? Like, where would you tell people to start? And I know you have your Seth Super 7, which I did teach my chat GPT and I still
Cool.
use every single day. I really do.
Right.
But what maybe it's that, or what are your core tenets of kind of what you would encourage people to do to increase and improve their
Right.
messaging?
Well, the first thing I start with is relevance. And relevance means that the most compelling messages have to join whatever conversation is going on inside the person's head. And it's usually surrounding the problem and the symptoms of the problem that your product or service solves. You have to know what types of conversations they're having. Like I always tell people, you have to pretend you're filming a documentary of your prospect's life from the time they wake up in the morning to the time they go to bed at night, and they're staring at the ceiling trying to get to sleep. At some points during the day, they bump into the symptoms of the problem that you're going to help them solve. What does that look like? What type of internal conversations are going through their head? What's going on in their body and their nervous system? What are other people saying about them? What are they saying to themselves? Like, God, I can't stand this pain in my right arm. If they've got golfer's elbow, it hurts every time I open a door. I wish I could go to the gym and go out to play golf with my friends, but I can't do it because of this pinching pain. And so if my message says, what's this pinching pain in your right elbow? Don't you wish you could go out and play golf with your friends, but now it hurts so bad that you can't even go to the gym and can't turn a doorknob? That's an opening to a good ad because I've just joined the conversation going on in their head. I've fused my message to their internal dialogue, and I've now hijacked their internal dialogue. I've become the voice in their head. And if I can continue to lead them down that path, I can get them to take action eventually. So that's the first thing is joining the conversation going on in their head, and more importantly, understanding the emotional context of the conversation.
That's super interesting. So one thing that stuck out to me that you said earlier is that you were like, man, I was the most awkward person in the world. And I would venture to imagine that for most maybe introverts or people who would also identify with that sentence, copywriting or understanding human behavior or speaking on behalf of someone, which is kind of really what marketing messaging does, would be the last thing that somebody would want to do. So like, how did you actually fall in love with the idea of psychology, and you've become so emotionally intelligent and you can read people so well? Like, what ultimately made this such a passion for you?
Well, I think it was that part of it was that incident, but also I grew up in a household where there was a lot of manipulation, a lot of verbal manipulation. Everyone in my family is extremely skilled at the verbal arts, right? And that's actually where the word sorcerer came from. A lot of people don't know that, but it means someone who is capable of seducing a person with their words. And so it's considered a form of magic in the ancient world. It was, and so I was around a lot of people like that, where there was a lot of verbal manipulation, and I had to be able, as I was a middle child, so I had the younger fighting with the older and all that stuff, and I had to be able to really quickly evaluate a person's motives and figure out who was a threat and who wasn't. And I also had to be able to dissect, like when someone was fibbing me, when someone was trying to get me to believe something that wasn't true or manipulate me in some way. Like it was almost like a self-defense tactic for me. So I developed these Wolverine blade skills in being able to dissect from people's words that are coming out of their mouth what's actually going on in their mind and what their next move is going to be. And so it was really a survival instinct for me in the beginning, but now it's become a passion for me because I can predict, because I can predict the way people are going to act. I think I can be a little more gracious towards people because I believe people based on their actions and based on what I believe their actions are going to be, rather than their words, which is that's a whole other rabbit trail we could get down. But I think a lot of introverts, because we happen to listen more and we happen to take in a lot more, introverts usually make very good copywriters because we spend more time trying to read the room and really figure out, what people are about.
That totally makes sense. Okay, I want to take this a layer deeper, and you and I have had these conversations at Rudy's events, so I know you're here for it. So you say you're able to read people. Like, what do you think is or maybe do you think there is, like the spiritual connotation behind that? Because I think some people coming from like the Christian world would call that like discernment. What have you found? And maybe like if you want to call it spiritual or like metaphysical world, also ties to this language of persuasion, copywriting, messaging, things like that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think there are universal archetypes in terms of certain virtues, certain character traits, certain fears that are universal and that we're all connected to in some way. And that if you understand those and the way that they operate and the way that they express themselves through an individual person, it can help you to understand people across a multitude of diverse contexts and in different cultures. And so I think having a very spiritual, almost an archetypal view of the world, kind of like what Carl Jung talked about, I think one of the reasons he understood people so well is because he had this understanding that there were these archetypes. Like there are archetype emotions. There's the emotion of validation that I talk about validation, excitement, security, and purpose as the primary emotions. Those are universal archetypes. If validation means everyone wants to feel like they matter, like they're important. And excitement is self-explanatory. Security is self-explanatory. Purpose is self-explanatory. And so if you understand that no matter what language a person speaks, no matter what their upbringing is, no matter what culture they're in, they're acting out of those needs, either because that need isn't being met or they're trying to get it met in some way, or they're trying to defend themselves from having that need taken away from them. And once you understand things at an archetypal level, which I consider to be like the stuff below the iceberg, or the roots of the tree, you understand like where the branches are going to grow from there. Whereas most people kind of start, okay, what words are working now for my ads? What do I say that's going to get these people to? If you start from there, you're almost always going to be chasing after the next trend. If you start from the roots and the archetypal spiritual nature of people that is universal to all of us, you can understand not only where those branches come from, but predict where they're going to go next based on what's happening in the marketplace.
That is so brilliant. That, wow, my brain, I love this stuff. I could talk about this all day. So, literally, though, you think about it, Seth, like how many marketers or how many CEOs are out there feeling like they're banging their head against a wall because they tried three different ads because they bought a $97 thing that told them like these three ads will work every time. And no one has ever just taken the care to be able to teach somebody like, hey, this worked for this person in this niche because of this. But when you look at your avatar who has these problems and these deeper root systems, that's why maybe this wasn't connecting. And I just think that
Yeah,
our world of online marketing has done the world a disservice with just thinking like, oh, well, here's 100 viral headlines. And it's like, okay, great. But I think very
right.
rarely are people, like, I don't know if people have ever heard, I mean, I don't know, unless they're really reading some deep Dan Kennedy or Eugene Schwartz or whatever. Like, I guess, yeah. Have you seen that in the marketplace? You coach a lot of people too. So I guess what are the things that you feel most often you're rerouting people that they're trying this because they've heard this or this is their
Right.
instinct? And what are you typically bringing back people to? Are they these core tenets you've been talking about?
Yeah, and I was talking to somebody about this yesterday. A good example of this is funnels, because really a funnel is a psychological tool. You're taking a person through a series of micro commitments that are taking them from being a complete stranger to someone who is a raving fan of your brand. And the speed and the efficiency at which you can do that is dependent on how you understand how ideas get into people's heads. And the purpose of an ad that goes to a landing page, that goes to an offer page, that goes to an upsell, order bump, email marketing, call booking, is to take them through a series of micro commitments. It's very much like a journey all the way up a mountain. And you have to understand the psychological steps a person goes through to being completely unfamiliar with an idea like a brand or a product or a service to being someone who's completely sold on almost a cult like commitment to it. And a lot of people will come into our program, and because they didn't understand that, someone goes, well, a webinar funnel worked over here, so I'm going to use a webinar funnel for this person. Or a challenge worked here, so I'm going to use the challenge here. Well, what are the psychological steps that that person needs to go through for that specific product? You have to first understand where they are right now in their understanding of the problem. And that's what Eugene Schwartz talks about. And that's what I talk about when I talk about my model of the buyer's journey. And once you understand that, it's easy to understand not only what type of funnel to use, what type of offer, what type of ad they need to see, what they need to see next. If they don't respond here, where we need to take them next. And so that's the problem that I think that I'm like, it's like a doctor. Someone comes in, their leg's been broken and it's grown back wrong. That's the bone I have to keep snapping and resetting, is that one. It's a little frustrating, but at the same time, I think a lot of people out there intend well and just are not well informed about how to set person on the right path in the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. In your years of having done so many different things to yourself between having a music business and then your own copyright business and now kind of attaching yourself to a really, really powerful machine like Rudy is, what would you say if somebody was starting over today are your biggest life lessons of what you've seen people do wrong, maybe in their mindset or even in their physical
Hmm.
actions? Like, what would be your best recommendation and advice to somebody who's completely starting a business today in 2023 in the online marketing world, and maybe some core things that you're like, this is what works and absolutely do not do this, and just dropping some wisdom for
Yeah.
some newbies?
Well, starting with your mindset, you absolutely have to create a barbed wire fence around your life from toxic people. And you have to get them the hell out of your life. You have to get people in your life who are just as ambitious as you are, who give a damn just as much as you do. Because a toxic person, especially if they're a partner, will bring you down faster than a millstone around your neck. I don't care how talented you are. You absolutely have to have that. If you don't get that, then you're toast, right? The second thing is, I would say you have to learn how to cut things faster when you know they're not working. Because a lot of people get into this thing that psychologists call the sunk cost fallacy, where they evaluate something not based on how much potential it has, but how much they've invested into it in the past. Like I had my grandparents when I was growing up had this car that was a piece of crap, and it just kept breaking down on them. And they said we don't want to get rid of it because we've invested so much money into it. But they weren't evaluating it based on how well it was going to serve them in the future, but by how well it was going to serve them, how much they had invested in it, which is a garbage way to evaluate things. And I would say that the third and most important thing is that money loves speed, and you need to, when you have an idea, you need to act on it, get it out there into the marketplace, and let the market respond to it instead of taking the next 6 months, a year to build out every single step and find out either A, people don't want it, or B, you've built the wrong series of micro commitments to get them into it. And I think that's the one thing that a lot of people get stuck, and that's just trying to constantly perfect something and not getting it out there in the marketplace. And Thomas Edison said this. He said that the purpose of his life was to take ideas that other people hadn't managed to get out there in the marketplace and to act on those and to actualize them. And I think one thing, if you read, there's a really good book called Edison as I Know Him, which was written by Henry Ford, has a perspective on Edison that you've never heard about in school. Henry Ford talked about how good Edison was at evaluating how well a product was going to do in the marketplace before he did all the work of developing and building it and putting a marketing campaign together. And I think that's the most important thing we can learn from his life is just to find out how the market's going to respond before you go through all the work to to building it.
Yeah, I love that. I've heard some people like on a very simplified, like oversimplified level, and I've made this mistake for sure. But I've heard some people call it an ask campaign, where they're like, hey, if you're starting a business and you're wondering like if your people are actually interested in it, like post an Instagram story, post something on Facebook, and throw it out there in terms of like, hey, if this thing existed, who would be interested regardless of the price or something like that. And I've actually tried that too, even in my market. And this is really just kind of like a side comment, but yeah, I've tried that, and it's amazing how, and I'm laughing to myself because I totally didn't do this the right way, but it's amazing how many people waste so much time and money because they fall in love with their product or they fall in love with the idea of something, and they don't validate the market whatsoever.
Yeah, and I posted this on Facebook a few weeks ago. People don't buy big ideas; they buy solutions to problems. And we fall
Mm.
so much in love with our ideas that we don't want to give up on them. They're like our children, we don't want to we don't want to give up on them, and so we just keep trying to get it to work. And the market's like, nah, don't want that. And you could have found
Yeah.
out from the beginning whether they wanted it or not.
Yeah. So this makes me think of this. You'll relate to this because you're a musician too. So I think of that as like you said with like your children. My parents are incredibly musical people. They met in a recording studio, 40 years ago. And I'll never forget, like we'd be at our high school band concerts or our high school, choir or whatever. And it's like when you do have an acuity to something, it's very, very hard to be in an environment where the performance is not up to par, because you have eyes to see, and it's hard to
Mm.
not be critical or analytical, let's just say, if you don't attach an emotion to it about those different things. And it's like somebody just like I'll give you a funny story. So my parents were judging a music competition at something, whatever, and everybody, it was the year after the Titanic came out. And so, as you can imagine, like 17,000 of the women who were singing all sang My Heart Will Go On. And like
Right.
on the 16th performance of this, they see, this very, very not good, below average performance of a really powerful song. They have somebody come up, and my mom turns to this woman, and this woman's like, well, or maybe it's after the judging. And this woman goes, well, I just don't understand why, contestant number 16 didn't win. She did this and she did this and she did this. And my mom famously, same personality as me, okay, famously turns to her and she goes, are you the mother? because this lady like totally was like, well, this number 16.
Yeah.
And how often do we do that with our businesses too, which is why we need
Yep.
mentorship. We need people in our life just to say, hey, I love you, you're awesome, but this video sucks and
Yeah.
here's how to fix it. And you're not broken, but like we need to keep trying. And one thing that I did want to ask you about is like you were talking about money loves speed. How has your perspective on failing forward and just trying and not getting your identity caught up in when something doesn't work? Because I think a lot of people in the beginning of their entrepreneurial journey crumble at the first sight of my ad didn't work, and it takes a backbone to be able to keep going. What has been your experience with the concept of failure, getting results, taking massive imperfect action, and kind of all of that in your career?
Well, that I'll go back to that quote from Les Brown where he said, "It's not what you do, but it's who you become." If you evaluate yourself based on your performance, I don't care if it's during a success or a failure. Failure is going to be extremely painful, going to be scary, it's going to be shameful, and success is going to be intoxicating and not in a good way. Because Jim Rohn says this: don't rise too high on your successes, don't fall too low on your failures. And people say, well, I need to not take my failures personally. You also need to not take your successes personally, because by doing that, you're telling your brain that your self worth is attached to your ability to get a certain result. And a lot of people who grew up with really nitpicky perfectionist parents have a lot of problems in this area. And so I think if you evaluate yourself according to other people's evaluations of you, or according to how well you perform, or according to other things that are superficial, that's in psychology called the locus of control. Is always going to be on the outside of you. It's like someone driving by you and being able to turn their steering wheel and make your car go to the side. Something on the outside can always control you. For me, it's always been, I know that my self-worth is based on my ability to continue to expand and express like the God-given natures that are on the inside of me. And as long as I am always committed to that, it doesn't matter how many times I fail. I guess I'm just bulletproof when it comes to people's criticism and failure, because I understand where my worth comes from as a person. And a lot of that comes from my faith and my relationship with Jesus Christ too. My experience with him that's on my website about how I became born again really turned the volume down on most of the drama in life, and it doesn't bother me, probably to a fault sometimes.
Mm.
So I guess that really would be the source of my strength in being able to face failure with courage.
Come on. I love that. Absolutely positively. And I completely concur to all of that. Well, I would love if you feel up to that for you to share a little bit more of that story, because that is definitely something that we are very open about on this podcast.
Right.
So what was that transformation like for you, on a spiritual level, on a personal level, on your perspective in life? Why don't we dive a little bit into that?
Well, this is something I've never shared publicly, and I've only told about 5 people about it. So um, it's hard for me to talk about without being emotional. But I went through a very very dark childhood. I became what you would call a Satanist when I was 15 or 16 years old. And most Satanists don't believe in Satan. They're just what I would call hedonistic atheists. But I actually like believed there was. It was funny because I didn't believe in God. I was raised as a Southern Baptist, and I just really turned away from the faith. I don't know why people say if you're raised Christian, you're more likely to be Christian. I think it's kind of the opposite in some ways. That's how it was for me. But I really turned away from it and become a pretty bad dude. I was having like satanic rituals in my bedroom with some of my friends, when I was a kid. When I was 16, 17 years old. And then when I was 17, I had this experience where I was literally awake, and I heard the voice of what sounded to me like a demon saying, and I was laying there on my bed. I wasn't asleep. When people hear this, tell this story, they say, "Ah, you were dreaming. You were asleep. That was sleep hypnosis or whatever all this other stuff is." I've had all those things, and this was not that. This was something that actually spoke in my ear and said, I wanted to become a musician at that time, a really well-known, famous musician. I played the guitar and everything, and it said, if you'll give yourself to me in the name of Satan, I will say the magic word. And I knew the magic word meant me becoming this great musician that I wanted to become. And it scared the hell out of me. Remember, I was an atheist at this time, but I said, in the name of God, go away. That's what I said to the voice. And it actually vanished for a while, but that incident started repeating itself like clockwork at the same exact time every week, Monday morning at 7:30. It didn't matter if I was awake, asleep, I could be sitting there with friends, I would all of a sudden start hallucinating. And I had never done any type of hallucinogenic drugs or anything like that. And so this went on for almost 10 years, on and off to the point where it almost drove me crazy. And I finally got to the point where I was forced to accept that there was a spiritual world. Unless I'm crazy, and I think that if I was crazy, it probably would show up in other areas of my life. Like I would be delusional about other things. But that went on for about 10 years until finally, during one of these episodes, I was sitting there in my one-bedroom apartment. I was living in North Tampa at the time, not the nice place side of North Tampa. It was a very bad side of North Tampa, and I saw this light coming into the window, and the light looked like, you know, the Terminator, the second Terminator movie, where the thing is made of liquid metal and it kind of comes into form. It took the form of this little boy, and he walks up to me, and he touches me. And I felt two things in that moment. I felt this incredible feeling of like he knew everything about me, right down to everything, every memory, every intention, every action that was stored in every single cell of my being. He knew the dirtiest, filthiest, most disgusting, horrible things about me. I felt that, and I also felt this overwhelming feeling of grace, forgiveness, and love. And those two things, feeling those at the same time, almost like it felt like it was tearing my soul apart, because I couldn't contain the fact that there could be this knowledge of the worst thing about me and still this love at the same time. And it just, I asked the child, I said, "Are you the Messiah?" And I don't know why I asked that, but he said, "If you are, as a small child, then I am who you say I am." And this was during a time when I was still accepted that there was a God, accepted there was a spiritual world, but I was a pretty anti-religious, anti-Jesus, anti-Christian atheist. Like, I did not want to accept that this was happening, but I couldn't. I was awake. You know how sometimes you have a dream and then you wake up later and you're like, oh, that was a dream, but it seemed real at the time. There, for a 2 week period after this, I was beside myself. I'd be sitting there teaching a music lesson, and I'd have to leave the room because I'd burst into tears. And I'm not someone who cries very easily. So anyway, right after that, as soon as I said that, I felt like my soul was ripped out of my body, and I went outside, and I saw that the sky was completely black. It was just as black as night, and there were people walking by and kind of going about their life, and something seemed very wrong to me, that people were just kind of minding their own business and acting the way they were. And I felt this voice in my head say, "Look behind you." And I looked behind me, and I saw this cross raising up into the air, and he was hanging on it. And
Wow.
there was so much blood, it was pouring down to the ground underneath the cross. And when I saw him, I cannot describe the feeling that I had. I walk up, I kneel down under it, and the whole time I'm thinking, this can't be real. I didn't want it to be real. And I could literally taste the iron in his blood as it was coming down my head and over my mouth and my whole body. And I fell apart in that moment. And I all of a sudden I snapped out of it, and for, like I said, for 2 weeks after that, I was beside myself. For years after that, I was trying to reconcile this idea that the last thing I wanted to accept is that Jesus was who he said he was. It was just, yet my friends, my atheist friends, they did not know what the hell to do with me. A lot of them
Wow.
stopped talking to me because they didn't know what to do with me. But, I mean, I haven't been perfect since then. I mean, I did work in the ministry for a while, and I was really, did all the street evangelism out there in Ybor City, and went out and prayed for people and preached the gospel, and used to walk into the Scientology building and preach to those guys. And I've kind of, since then, I've gone through periods of my life when I was more spiritual than others and more committed to my faith. But after that experience, having that experience, like, there's very few things that really bother or scare me after that. It's almost like if you have a near death experience, everything else in your life has the volume turned down on it.
Wow.
So yeah, that's like I said, I've never shared that. That's the first time I've shared that without bursting into tears, by the way. So
Wow. Well, thank you. I feel so honored, and you're definitely talking to the right person for this kind of stuff, because growing up in a very spiritual home myself, like I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of what I would call, religion. And, one thing that remains true is that I think when you see these the abundance of the supernatural, and not in, again, like a religious way or somebody faking it or just, like mustering up, like I call it shaking and bacon, just what you see on whatever.
Right.
But when it's like undeniable, like the love of God shows up where you are moved to repentance because there's just, I love how you said that, Seth. It's like I was seen for everything that I was, but also like the glory of the Lord was there, where it's like, oh my gosh, like it's okay, like I'm loved, I'm, there's this grace. And one thing that I wanted to ask you is that you said, and I don't know exactly how you said it, so I'll have to play it back later, but you said like I had run away and I really wanted to accept, like, Christianity is the last thing that I wanted to accept,
Right.
that this was it. Like, why do you think that is? And I think it's so hard because, you know, there's Jesus who's perfect and who never fails people. And then we have religion and we have the church and we have these things that a lot of people are doing their best, but inherently we're human and crap happens. And
Right.
believe me, I've been through more spiritual hurt than a lot of people will in their whole lifetime. So like, what I guess, or what would be your advice to people who maybe have been hurt by the church or religion or, people in the church, and how is Jesus different, or how can you help people understand, like, Jesus didn't fail you, people failed you? Like, what would your advice, and
Well,
yeah.
I think you took the words out of my mouth right there. It's are you mad at God, or are you mad at the way people who say they represent God have acted?
Yeah.
Because to me, it's like I'm not going to let anybody else's behaviors or choices come between me and my quest for the truth. I
Mm.
don't care if every other Christian in the world acts like an asshole. If I want to know who he really is, and there was a period of time when I stopped going to church and I just read the Bible and I said I want to know who Jesus was.
Yep.
And I don't think the guy in the Bible is anything like what I learned in Sunday school. He's much more fierce. He's much more difficult. He's much more belligerent. He's not a terribly like meek and mild and nice person. They don't publicly execute people like that.
Come on, say that.
And he walked into Jerusalem knowing what was going to happen to him, which takes a lot of guts. And so I'm not going to allow somebody else's behaviors come between me and my quest for the truth. And if you do, that's pathetic. And I'm not talking about you. I'm talking
Mm.
about anybody who's listening to this who's saying, I can't believe in God because of how people act. You got to decide, is your relationship with the Maker, whether they exist or not, more important than other people's behavior? I think it is.
Mm. Amen. Absolutely. Another thing I want to add to that too, and then ask you a question about, like, this is where when people think that the gifts and the moving of the Holy Spirit is dead, it infuriates me, because it's like sucking all the goodness out of, like, I'll give my husband Landon as an example. He was raised by an amazing family. They're incredible, but in a small town church where it was like, you see what you see. You got what you got, right? And so when he met me, and no disrespect to that, like, obviously thank God for Christian environments. And when he met me, I was like, here's the Holy Spirit. It's one of those things where I was like, take it or leave it, baby. And a lot of our conversations, what was so cool is that Landon didn't have a ton of what I would call religion to undo. He had a very great upbringing of Bible stories. This is who Jesus is, not no church or whatever. But what I've seen in a lot of other environments, I lived in Nashville for a while, like a very large, let's just say, denominational community, and people will fight to the freaking death about how healing doesn't exist anymore and you shouldn't be prosperous and all this crap, where I'm like, so you're telling me that we're supposed to, like, our unique selling proposition as Christians is that we should be average, broke, pissed off, unemotionally regulated people who your one goal in life as a woman is just to
Yeah.
get married and get your MRS degree, and as a man you just get, what I mean, like, just this average pathetic life with this average and pathetic Jesus who doesn't do miracles anymore. And I'm just like,
Yeah.
is this really the best that we have? And people will literally fight to convince other people of an average God. Like, have you ever thought about that,
Yeah.
how stupid that
Yeah,
is?
I've thought about that, and I've been in Pentecostal and Baptist churches, and there are some things that bother me about the Pentecostal churches. Like,
Sure,
for
yeah,
instance, like
sure.
when people would go and they're crazy speaking in tongues, which I speak in tongues. I believe in the gift of tongues, but people, like, they're jumping over pews and they're acting nutty, and then
Right.
they leave the place and their character hasn't changed. it's like something should have changed if that's really the Holy
Yes.
Spirit. You should
Yes.
be walking out of there and people should be like, what the hell happened to you? And it should be
Literally.
a lasting change. And
Literally.
and so that does bother me, but at the same time, I do think some of that's conditioning, right? People are raised to believe that, being religious is about being prim and proper and tame and meek and mild. And but I think also some of that is if you're going to make an excuse not to take your life to the next level, what better
Mm,
way to do it than to say that this is what God wants from me? And that's like
mm,
the highest approval you can give yourself for not leveling up your life. And so if I don't really have what it takes to go out there and to become rich and prosperous and successful and influential and all these other things, and I want a good excuse for it, I'm just going to say it's God doesn't want me to do that. And then I get to pat myself on the back and wear my poverty and my mediocrity as a badge of honor.
come on. Yes, absolutely. That is it. And again, I just think about like, okay, so we're talking about the creator of the universe here. I'm like, okay, if we really think about it, like, do you think that God breathed life into the world and created mankind as the express image of God, where there's streets of gold and all these different things, and not just like that it's just about wealth or money or whatever, but like you said, even just like great character versus average character, great marriages versus average marriages. Like, do you really think that if we are created in the image of God, that God's best and his most perfect will and his desire for us is to be average in any category? Like, I just don't, I think that misrepresents the nature of God to me.
Yeah. Well, I study Hebrew, and there's a passage, of course, in Genesis when it talks about God says in Hebrew, "Naaseh Adam b'tzelomenu kidmutenu v'yodu vidgat hayam uva of hashamayim uva behema uva ho haaretz." That's saying it's saying to rule over, to dominate the birds of the air, the fish of the sea, the animals, everything. That vehi veshuha in Hebrew is a very it's not a very nice word. When it talks about dominating, it's talking about dominating in a very forceful and a very commanding way. And it's like, what do you think? What do you think it says that for? Has God changed his mind about that? I mean, you can make the argument that the fall kind of undid that, but there was this
Mhm.
guy named Jesus who came along and restored and gave us the keys of the kingdom back. And he said the gates of hell wouldn't prevail against it. Well, gates don't attack people. So if you're saying that gates won't prevail, it means that somebody's attacking that gate. Right? That's an aggressive action. And so I think
Mm.
that domination, that nature that God put in us to rule over and to dominate and subdue the earth, I think it's a responsibility of ours. Of course, we don't want to harm other people in doing it, but
Yeah.
it does say that those two things in the New and Old Testament for a reason.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course, you what's so cool about God is like that is his nature, and then also he's like, hey, and also like you don't have authority over what you don't love, so like check yourself. You know what I mean? And I think
Right.
that that's what's so cool about the balance of like we can be powerful and also we can have an incredible character, which I think if at anything we find ourselves on just like the tail end of a spectrum, like, okay, great, well then let's just like try to live a life of balance, probably a great rule of thumb anyway. The next
Right.
question that I have for you is, so you've had all these amazing life experiences and you're a very successful human being, you're a very learned human being. What like motivates Seth today? Like what gets you out of bed every morning? Like what do you love to do, and what motivates you in this season?
Well, I think the work that I'm doing here at More Capital at Rudy's company, and I could be doing it anywhere. I just think this is the best place for me to be doing it because of Rudy and I are a lot alike. But I've told people I think it's the most important work in history because
Mm,
entrepreneurs really built the modern world. Visionaries built the modern world. And we've been fortunate enough to inherit most of, like, we didn't have anything to do with creating what we're living in right now. In fact, I had a buddy who said if you sent me back in time 1,000 years, nothing would change because he doesn't know how to create any of the stuff that we have today. We've inherited it, and I think we've mistaken an inherited wealth and an inherited advanced technology and advanced civilization, and we've mistaken that for earned and think that somehow we earned it and we built it. It was built by visionaries who represent a very, 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 very small segment of the population. It's a very lonely journey. It's a very hard journey where everybody else a lot of the time is telling you all the reasons something doesn't work. And if I can do my part in supporting those people who, in my opinion, built the modern world that we've inherited and are going to build the future, that to me is I can't think of any more work that's more important than
Mhm.
that, and that's what keeps me going.
Hmm, that's amazing. Well, I cannot believe that we've already been talking for 45 minutes already. We could talk for 3 hours, so we'll be in Florida in 2 months, and maybe we
Yeah.
can talk more. But my last question for you is there anything else that you feel specifically on your heart that you just want people to know, whether it's about you or whether it's advice for people or just encouragement? I always like to end the show just by letting people really share that, and then the best way to get connected with you if people want to connect further.
Well, the best way to connect with me is my name and my first and last name. You can find me through that as my Twitter handle, as Instagram is Seth Czerepak 1976, which gives away my age, and then SethCzerepak.com is my website, and you can also look me up on Facebook. The best way to work with me is through More Capital, through Rudy's company. Um, as far as do I have to spell my last name, or are you going to give it like it's
Oh,
C
it'll be all over
C
the
Z?
show
Okay,
notes.
okay, perfect. Because it took me 26 years to learn to spell it. As far as encouragement goes, I'm going to go back to the locus of control. Your value in yourself, the way that you evaluate, your value as a human being. In fact, I tell people the hardest sale you ever make is the sale you make to yourself about yourself, and it
Wow.
boils down to the question: what are you worth to you? Not what are you worth to somebody else, to anybody else. What are you worth to you? If your sense of your own value as a human being cannot be attached to your performances, to the things you do, to the things you own, and it certainly can't be attached to other people's opinions and evaluations of you or anything else. You have to have an untouchable sense of what your value is as a human being. And the best way I think to do that is to commit your life to discovering what your gifts are and developing and expressing those, and understanding that the most important thing in life is not what you do, not who you know, not what you own, but it's who you become.
Hmm. Wow. Well, I wrote down, so I keep this little notepad next to me of like bookmark moments when people say great things. And I'm like, we're trying to get two out of every message. So far, I have 20 written down. So that's going to make this really easy for my editors. And I'm going to be posting a lot of short form from this because you were
Cool.
dropping bombs, Seth. So I really appreciate your time and your wisdom. I know this won't be the last time that we talk, but I just really, really appreciate you sharing your story. And I know this is going to impact and bless so many people. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it. And everybody, we will see you guys next week. Thanks for watching.